Okay, let's get this show on the road.
Don't need me, but I'm the only one.
Hello, welcome back to We Are Wool People. My name is Ailsa. On this channel we talk about knitting. So I'm coming to you on the back of a big couple of weeks in knitting, both for me personally and for the knitting community at large. So I have two finished objects, one I'm actually wearing and one I've given away, but I've got a photo of it. And I've got a lot of progress actually on a bit of an obscure project from last year that I wasn't sure whether it was going to be a success or not, and having worked on it in the last couple of weeks I'm finding that I'm really liking it more and more, which is exciting, so we'll look at that. I've got an update on my Milady's dress, which has hit a bit of a stumbling block, which I'm actually a bit disappointed about, and a bit of progress on two other WIPS, and a very, very exciting brand new cast on that I can't stop knitting. So buckle up. So I hope you've got your knitting, and I hope you stick around for me to talk about these projects. Well, it's been a big fortnight in knitting, hasn't it? Have you guys been out there on the knitting community, on the knitting socials and the Knitterverse? Have you seen the drama that has unfolded in the last couple of weeks? If you haven't, I'll give you a very quick rundown on a couple of the dramatic things that have happened in internet knitting in the last 2 weeks. So the first thing that's happened is, I don't know if you've noticed, but if you've looked at the hottest, the patterns on Ravelry sorted by hot right now over the last couple of weeks, from time to time it looks like that hot right now list has been hijacked by a lunatic. And that's because, if you don't know why, it's because on Reddit there's a group called Craftsnark, and to a lesser extent there's a couple of other groups on Ravelry, Demon Trolls and Ravelry Rubberneckers, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this podcast are members of those groups. Anyway, so you might already know that on those groups what they did was, particularly on the Reddit Craftsnark page, someone started a thread that said, post your most unhinged patterns you've ever seen on Ravelry. And then a lot of people came in and started posting some eccentric and quirky and downright unhinged knitting patterns in those threads. And because all the links are in the threads, then everybody reading the threads, or a lot of people reading the threads, clicked on those links, and that actually affected Ravelry's algorithm. So therefore, when you went into Ravelry and looked at the patterns in hot right now order, some of these really lunatic patterns and really eccentric and quirky patterns were coming up in the top 10, which I found absolutely hilarious because, in spite of appearances, I'm not a pearl clutcher. There was one in particular that was really funny. It was it was called something about the hookup, and it was like a mankini that had a halter neck on it, and it was this guy standing semi-naked in a kitchen wearing this halter neck mankini. Hilarious. And then last week Woolfolk Knits made an Instagram post saying that it had been brought to their attention that one of their pattern testers had actually distributed, without their knowledge rather, distributed one of the patterns during the testing period on a Discord server for free. And then that led to the discovery of mass sharing sites on Discord servers of paid for patterns and in other intellectual property in the knitting world. And a lot of the designers joined in on that conversation over there on Instagram, and it was really interesting, and it was really funny because it does turn out that the people on the Discord servers who are moderating those groups or those servers were not sorry, and as a matter of fact some of them were really quite aggressive and justified their actions by saying, well, I wouldn't pay for your rubbish pattern in the amount that you want for it anyway, and what you're doing by charging $6, $10, however much, or any money really, for knitting patterns is in fact gatekeeping in the craft community. And what's more, you're not taking into account how difficult it is for people in developing nations to whom $10 is a really lot of money. And these Discord servers are predominantly in Korea, I believe. Anyway, so it turns out that the guy responsible for that, his name is Knitting C, I think on Instagram. He might have changed his name. He used to be Young Man Lee on Ravelry, but he's since changed his name to a different name. And he is not the first time he's done it. During COVID, there was a movie called Knives Out, and in that movie there was a cabled sweater, and a designer had reverse engineered that sweater into quite a detailed pattern, which she had released on Ravelry for free back then. And this Young Man Lee guy had taken that pattern, changed it for it to be top down instead of bottom up, or bottom up instead of top down, and released that pattern for sale. But on his other socials and his Discord servers and, you know, Discord chat groups, whatever they are, he'd actually said, oh, what I've done is I've taken this free pattern and I've reverse engineered it, and I've reversed it, and here I am selling it. And that designer, who was I guess the victim of the original theft, I suppose, by Young Man Lee, interestingly, wasn't real happy with Woolfolk about them complaining about their pattern being stolen. And I'll link in the description to a really interesting blog post that she's written that really deep dives into this situation and says a lot of things about the arguments to and against pattern theft, because really that's what it is, isn't it? It's stealing patterns. And the moral of the story in this essay that is on this blog post that I'll link to is don't be a jerk. And it appears that this guy, not only is he not sorry when he's been called out and when he's actually been exposed, and when people are in fact asking him to explain himself, he's doubling down on his actions and covering up some of the comments that he said and doing quite a lot of very shady things. I think, unfortunately, that I really can't see the conversation, sadly, leading to a reduction in the number of people who are using these Discord server pattern resources for free, because I feel like it's a bit of an anonymous caper if you can get on these servers and get these patterns for free. I personally am lucky enough to be able to afford to buy patterns, and so I would never steal someone's intellectual property. One of the arguments they're using online as well is, you know, if I want a Louis Vuitton handbag, I don't just go and steal one, even if I can't afford it, just because I want one. But I suppose a knitting pattern isn't a Louis Vuitton handbag. It's very interesting. And the pattern that was on Ravelry, they did alert the Ravelry legal team. And Ravelry did in fact have that pattern removed. But I think after that, the user changed his name, and there's nothing to stop him from continuing to upload that pattern under different usernames whenever he feels like it. Because the pattern database in Ravelry, I don't know if you know this, is entirely self-regulated, and it is it's community regulated. So that's why when you, oh, itchy nose, sorry. That's why when you search for male patterns, for example, often 75% of your results are petite knit women's patterns and other designers' women's patterns. It's because whoever's putting those patterns on Ravelry is actually using those attributes so that they come up on all searches. It's a bit of sort of search engine optimization, I guess. That's the point of the practice. But yeah, if you search Ravelry for a bunch of attributes, you're not necessarily going to get every single pattern that has got those attributes, because the pattern base in Ravelry is community regulated. Did you know that? It's interesting, isn't it? The Ravelry consumer base now has got more than 10 million people, as we've talked about before, and I think that the day-to-day running of the activity on that site has been eroded by not only the huge exponential growth in the number of users, but also some of the internal things that have happened within that organisation. And if you want to learn more about that, I really strongly suggest that you head on over to the YouTube channel called Aspen in the Moment, where there are 2 really great deep dive episodes in there on some of the internal drama that has happened in Ravelry over the last 10 years. It's really quite funny in a way, because for an activity that people think is sort of a bunch of sweet old ladies sitting knitting or sitting crocheting, they certainly do have a lot of very, very strong opinions, and they really can get very fired up on the internet. So yeah, it's really, that's a really, both of those videos that are on Aspen in the Moment's website, really good. And there's another YouTube creator called Cinnamon Knits. You're probably all following her. If you're following me, you'll be following her. She's got 10,000 followers. But she did a really fantastic deep dive on a crochet situation that was adjacent to this sort of drama. It had to do with pattern plagiarism. So I hope that she does a video on this situation too, because I think that Aspen is actually taking a break from YouTube because she's suffering from some health issues. So in that space then, Breathing Yarn could possibly do a deep dive into this situation too. She's very insightful and has got a fantastic way of communicating. Cinnamon Knits is the same. I really do feel that if a deep dive was going to get done on YouTube, that she'd be a great person to do it, because I think that she would have some really intelligent and salient points to make about the implications of this kind of behaviour that appears on Instagram last year to be way more widespread than anyone's ever been talking about. One of the things that they did say, interestingly as well, was that the sharing of patterns amongst knitters and crocheters has always been part of the culture, and that is a bit of a grey area in terms of whether in fact it is copyright violation or theft. I don't think it is a grey area. I think it's copyright violation and theft. And the fact that it's been historically practiced in the culture of knitting and crochet for years doesn't make it right. So I feel like that's a bit of a weak argument. But what do you think? Now, all of this is available through reading the discussions on Reddit. So a lot of this drama is actually being fueled on Reddit in the Craft Snark group. And to a lesser extent, there's the Ravelry Demon Trolls and the Ravelry Rubberneckers group. All of those groups have got a lot of members. And, you know, particularly on the Craft Snark group, there's some pretty personal attacks in there. The comments in Reddit can get pretty spicy. And then there was another issue where a lesser known designer, but this designer's got a few followers and got, is quite popular, released a pattern for a sampler style colourwork shawl with a quilt kind of motif sort of vibe. And, you know, we all know that last year the quilt motif vibe was really very big in the knitting pattern community. Anyway, this shawl was called the Star Quilt Shawl or something like that. I'll put a picture up. And the very popular Rowan designer, who is very popular in the UK. She's designed for Rowan and she's done a lot of fashion work and she's internationally renowned. Florence Sperling, not to be confused with Handmade by Florence, which I thought they were the same Florence with 2 different surnames. I don't know how I got that wrong, God. Anyway, but no, Florence Sperling made a post on her Instagram, which has since been removed, that said, it's been brought to my attention that this pattern has been released, and whilst I'm sure mistakes can be made, I have been in contact with this designer to have a conversation about the likeness of their pattern to my pattern. And ironically, And what happened as a result of that is the original designer then took their pattern from Ravelry, pulled their pattern from Ravelry. And ironically, in what seems to be the opposite of what happened to Woolfolk knits, the Reddit community arced up in the opposite manner and said, now these two shawls look nothing like each other, and that the original designer, or the designer of the shawl that was released last week, has been working on motifs like this for a long time. It's quite, on brand for her, and that she teaches classes that involve all this colourwork / intarsia technique, and that Florence Sperling was a bully and was using her larger Instagram following and her greater social media influence to actually bully this other designer out of the space. And it does look like some of Florence's followers had actually gone into the Ravelry page or the pattern page of that previous design, and possibly even into that other person's Ravelry, and left some, pretty nasty comments. But the pattern originally did get pulled from Ravelry, and Florence Sperling gave another post that said, we've resolved it amicably and it's all good, let's move on, nothing to see here. But then, because of the Reddit comments that were really defending the designer of the other shawl, I think that designer might have felt supported enough to put that pattern back on Ravelry, but not for sale. You can't obtain that pattern, but the pattern does exist on Ravelry. She said that she'd put it back for the people who had favorited it and the people who had queued it, and that she said that she used that pattern as the basis for some of the classes that she'd been running, and that was the end of that. But that surprised me, because I have to admit, and this of course is my opinion, whose else's opinion would it be, but it's my opinion, I did definitely see a resemblance in those two shawls, particularly with the colours, and some of the motifs to me are very similar. But on the other hand, it is a crescent shaped shawl with colourwork a sampler style colourwork crescent shaped shawl. Is that original enough of itself to be considered to be copying if you put different colourwork motifs in that same shape? It's complicated, isn't it? And I do hope that some of the other YouTube creators that are far superior to me in their deep diving analysis and opinions do make some video content about this, because I think it's a discussion worth having. There was a lot of seriousness on Instagram last week regarding intellectual property, pattern pricing, designers, the size of designers, the assumption that because Petite Knits is really big that she's making an art of fortune, and even if she is, does that mean that her designs are okay to share because she makes enough money anyway, whereas these smaller ones aren't? And it's interesting, and I think that I don't think it's a closed, I don't think the discussion's finished, although I do think the heat will definitely subside now from the Instagram stories and the Instagram discussions between the designers. But yeah, I don't think it's a finished subject. So that's that. That's the drama that I was reading all about last week on Instagram. Did you guys see that? Anyway, let's talk about my WIPS. Less about that, more about me. What am I wearing? I'm wearing my finished object, and my finished object is, I'll put some B-roll up, my Salty Days sweater by a pattern by QUIN, who is Veronica Lindberg, another fantastic, I think she could be a Finnish designer. I think she's from Finland. I think she lives in Denmark, but she's from Finland. Anyway, she's got a great YouTube channel as well. She's probably one of the original YouTubers. She knitted. So this pattern, I've talked about it quite a lot. What I might do now is just run through the specs of it, because anyone who wanted to make a Salty Days sweater like this one couldn't, because the yarn's not available anymore, so it's not really a lot of point talking about it. What did I do? I worked on a 4mm needle in this horrible Lion Brand Nubu yarn, but I did actually want exactly what I've ended up with, or I would have preferred it to have sleeves, but ran out of yarn. But I did end up with exactly what I wanted, something that was really drapey and really oversized and very relaxed for the Australian summer. I'm wearing it with a camisole underneath, and I've teamed it today with a pair of barrel leg jeans and some Birkenstocks. Ugly shoes, comfortable though. Some barrel leg jeans and some Birkenstocks and a hat, because Australian summer. I wore it last weekend when I went day drinking with my friend Donna in the city in Sydney, and we had a lovely lunch and nice sitting around in the sun. We had a nice time, we always do. Anyway, but I paired it that day with a pair of straight leg white trousers that were gifted to me from my sister, and they're Scanlon and Theodore, so it's very fancy. And I think I wore a different pair of shoes last week, I can't remember. I did what I had. It was hot. So I'm wearing this inside out. Hang on a sec. Okay, I've got it right way around now. So I knitted with a 4mm needle, which is actually quite a large needle for me. It's on a very loose gauge, and I added an extra diamond repeat across the diamond panel here, and again on the diamond panel that's underneath the cable section, because my row gauge was quite a bit shorter than the pattern row gauge, and that gave it the length I needed. And at the bottom, I was unable to complete what is supposed to be the entire rib section, which is a 3 purl by 1 knit rib. A great design, great rib combination actually. I was unable to finish that to go for the length of the sweater. So what I did was I just did 10 rows of this rib and used that as the band rib and just cast off in pattern. Didn't do a tubular cast off or anything like that. And on the sleeves, I picked up around the edge of the drop, because it's a drop shoulder jumper, I picked up around the edge and I just did a few rows of 1 by 1 rib, I think. Yep, a few rows of 1 by 1 rib, 10 rows, and then exactly the same in the collar. Might have been a few more rows in the collar, and then just bound off. I used every last scrap of yarn I had, and as a matter of fact, at the bottom for the cast off, I was actually going through the sweater, snipping off all the ends after I wove them in, and doing Russian knots to give me enough yarn to cast off, because I had about 40 stitches to cast off and I was completely out of yarn. I unravelled the swatch and I was literally very, very close to crying not being able to cast this jumper off. But I've done it and I am happy with it, and like I mentioned on my Ravelry projects, I'm delighted to be done with this project. I would knit another Salty Day sweater. I did enjoy it. I thought the pattern was quite good. I think that they said that there were mistakes in the pattern. I read that in some Ravelry comments. I didn't find any, but it could be because I knew what it was that we had to do, and so I could have missed the mistake by sort of just self-correcting kind of subliminally. Or the mistake's been corrected, or the mistake isn't there. I don't know. I do know that mine came out really well. I'm happy with it, and I would knit it again. But what I will also say is that not only am I glad to have been finished this jumper, very glad to say that I'll never have to work with Lion Brand Nubu ever again, because it's discontinued. Good on you, Lion Brand. It was a dud. My next work in progress that I'm going to share with you, actually I think I will share the good one, is the Opus project that I was talking about, my Opus project for 2024 that was started but not completed, because when I started it, I kind of fell out of love with it almost immediately after starting it, and I thought that it was dull and that I didn't like the colour, and I thought it was sort of prison grey, and I just didn't like it. But because I had the yarn already and I started, and it was very niche yarn that was only going to be used for this project in particular, because I'd been so specific about buying it for this project, that I thought, well, I will just continue and use the yarn that I've got until it runs out, and then I'll reassess. Well, I've done that, and my reassessment has led me to really love this project. So I'm going to pop it on and come back to you with it on and show you what it is. So this is the Tove dress, a pattern which I bought on Etsy, and I have crocheted this. I'm just trying to work out a way that I can stand up without unraveling it. I have crocheted this up to the waist, and you can see that if I were to just do a couple more rows, I could finish it, and it would be like a really kind of dramatic, sort of different off the shoulder top that I think is completely wearable. In fact, I really do love it, and I think the colour looks great and everything about it. I'm just actually more and more delighted with it as I go on. Now, this is obviously supposed to be a dress, and when I started it last year and was disappointed with it and thought I wasn't going to finish it, I thought, oh no, I'll just do it as a top, and I'll finish it as a top, and I'll wear it as a top. And even if I don't end up wearing it, it won't be such an investment in, you know, like it's not as though I carried on and finished the dress. But you know what? I'm going to finish it. I'm going to keep going down and do a dress with it. I think that it's got a really flattering shape, the way that the rows become shorter as it goes down towards the waist. I think it's got a very comfortable fit, and I'm really, really happy with it. So any crocheters out there, if you're looking for something different to make, it's quite a challenge. When you join from the underarms, the pattern takes a bit of nutting out, but it does work. I think what she fails to say in the pattern, and it would be simpler if she just used this sentence. When it comes to joining in the round, there is an entire page explaining what it is that you're doing when you're joining in the round. But one of the things that she doesn't mention that I think would be really helpful and very simple thing to say is that when you get to the underarm section, you have a dip in the wave that comes to the underarm, and same on the other side, and what you're adding under here is another dip in the wave. So these two dips disappear and are replaced by a single one up under here. Make sense? Yes, does make sense. And if she hadn't said that, because I was left with a bit of confusion when I got to the underarm, because I had two dips in the waves, and then I wasn't sure what, and you added some chains across the thing, and I wasn't sure how that was going to work. Don't know if I explained that very well. Probably didn't. But I bought some more yarn to finish this, because I've got this much left from the original batch that I bought, you know, mid last year. Only this much left of one ball, and there's plenty left at the local yarn store, so I got some more yesterday. I don't think this counts as stash enhancement, because it's to finish a project, right? So I'm crocheting this with Cartier Brisa, which is a mercerized cotton that's very, very shiny. And I think it is 100% mercerized cotton, and I don't know how they get the gloss in it. No, because it's 50% cotton and 50% viscose. So I do know how they get the gloss in it. They get it from the viscose. It's actually a really shiny, dark silvery yarn, and I thought that it had not, that the shine on it was not showing when I first started this project, but now that I've done a fair bit of it, I think it does shine. And every second row is done by done in a contrasting colour on the back, and for that I'm using the Bellissimo Airly in this really nice pale grey colour. And I've said this before, it's really clever the way that this pattern works, in that every second row is a single crochet into the back post from the other side of the work, which creates a little structural base for the next wave pattern on the front. So not only do you get these really nice ridges within the fan and the wave pattern, you also find that the wave pattern won't really stretch, because it's not attaching itself to the previous wave round, it's attaching itself to the structural reinforcement single crochet round that has been added in before. So it's genius, and I really like it. It probably would make a nice tea cozy, wouldn't it? It could be my tea cozy dress, which I feel quite sure when I finish it. And when I finish it and I go out with some of my non-knitting friends, that's what they're going to tell me, that I look like a tea cozy. But I don't care, because I made it and I like it. When I was at my last couple of rounds before it split for the underarms and you no longer work on the sleeves, they were really, really long rounds. And it reminded me of when you're making a circular yoke sweater. There's nothing like the relief that you get after you have finished doing your circular yoke, because those last few rounds on a circular yoke are so long and take such a long time to get round. There's so many stitches on the needle because you've got 2 fronts and 2 sleeves on the needle, and the same with crocheting. You're going all the way around, and it just feels like such a slog. But then when you do get to the underarms and the circumference of what you're making shrinks down, so much because the arms aren't there anymore, it feels so good and you go so fast down the body. I really love that feeling. It kind of has got that rhythmic repetitiveness that you know what's coming up next. I really enjoy that. So this is my Tove dress. It has been resurrected, and I'm really, really liking how it's going to work out. And I'm going to finish it just in time for winter probably, and so it might not get much of an outing. Speaking of outings, I have a few things planned over the next couple of months. One of them is the Australian Wool Show. Now, for the Australian Wool Show, I was planning my outfit. I'm not going to go and put my other top back on. Just give me a sec. Okay, I've got my top back on. Now, speaking of outings, we've got a few yarn festivals coming up in the next couple of months that I'm pretty excited about. February is going to be a quiet month, but in March, very early March, there is the Australian Wool Show that is on in Canberra. And my friend Donna and I have booked a hotel for 2 nights this year. Last year we had 1. This year we're going Friday and Saturday night. We're not staying in the hotel that the actual show is on, because it's a little bit expensive. So we are staying in a hotel directly across the road. If there is a dinner on for the Australian Wool Show like there was last year, I'll be going to that, because Donna and I went last year and we really did enjoy it, and I'm going to go again. It had trivia last year. It was fun. It was really fun. Anyway, we're going to go back to the Australian Yarn Show this year, and I've been thinking about what I'm going to wear, and I really want to wear more vibrant colours this year. And when I was in my local yarn store, I noticed that she'd actually had, I'm sorry for being distracted there, I've got a little dachshund at my feet who is licking my feet, which is kind of gross. I think she's scared of the wind. And I hope I've got the window open because it's really hot. I hope the wind has just picked up, so I hope that's not distracting too much. I don't think it is. And while I'm on the subject of looking out the window, there is a flock of black cockatoos in a tree in my eye line over there, and they are magnificent, beautiful, so lucky. And on that note, I have a brand new cast on, and are you ready? I really hope this colour comes up on camera because it is beautiful. You ready? That is Noro Silk Garden Sock Solo in colour T81, and I am pairing it with Knitting for Olive Soft Silk Mohair in Unicorn Purple, a colour that I have been coveting for a really long time. So there are the two colours paired together, and I'm making sweater number 30 from My Favourite Things knitwear. I cast this on, let me check my book, I didn't write the date down, Thursday. What date was Thursday? I cast this project on the 30th of January, and today's the 2nd of Feb, and I have done this much. It is a typical My Favourite Things knitwear construction. You start at the back and you knit 2 shoulder pieces. It doesn't help that I've got this put on the tubing like a dog's breakfast. You knit 2 shoulder pieces that are identical, and then you pick up along the longer edge of the shoulder pieces, and you knit some short rows to form the back neck, and then you continue down to create the back of the sweater until you get to the underarms. Then I'm presuming, yes, you're going to pick up along the front, knit down, join it together, come down, and then do something about the sleeves. I am absolutely loving this fabric. It just is so... The mohair gives the Noro, which is quite a hard yarn, quite a rustic yarn, the mohair gives the Noro a real softness, and it really blurs the colour tweed flecks that are in the Silk Garden Solo, which I think is really beneficial for the yarn. And because it's lighter, it kind of gives it all a real kind of snowy haze. I'm really enjoying this knit. I have done something that I don't normally do because I'm usually too lazy to do it, but this time I've been super conscientious, and it's a super pain in the neck. But what I've done is I'm actually alternating. I've got 4 balls of this, and I'm actually alternating all 4 skeins right from the start because I don't want any striping, and there are really long colour runs on these Noro yarns, and you never know what you're going to get in balls of Noro yarn. And if you ever had any experience with Noro yarn, I used to use QUIN a fair bit back in the day, and 2 balls of Noro they'd be riddled with knots. Sometimes you'd come from one colour, there'd be a knot and an entirely different colour on the other side of the knot. Sometimes the colour run would run from A to Z, and then the next ball would run from Z to A. You would potentially have a ball where an entire colour segment was missing, and then another ball where that colour segment was the only thing that was in it. It was very, very random what you used to get from Noro. I haven't used Noro yarn for many years for that reason, so I'm not sure whether it's still the same, but I am alternating all the way through, and whilst it's still going backwards and forwards, that's really fiddly and it's really slowing me down. But when I get into the round, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some helical knitting with all 4 balls and just chase them around each other till I get to the end. I've got a question about helical knitting, speaking of which I'm going to ask the Brains Trust who are watching today. So when you're doing helical knitting and you're chasing your yarns all the way around, how do you stop? You're always going to end up, as far as I can work out in my brain, which I'm not very spatially talented when it comes to thinking and things like that, you're always going to end up with 2 rows, and I'm not sure how you're ever going to really stop helical knitting. And there's nothing online to give you the advice on how to, I know they tell you how to set it up and how to knit helically. They don't tell you how to stop knitting helically, and I don't know. I'm finding it and I wish I did. So on Thursday, just before I cast that on, I went on to Ravelry and I looked and looked and looked for the perfect pattern, and even for this yarn, because in my vision I'm going to sew a pair of trousers in this fabric, which is a gingham linen, and I wanted to make a sweater to go with that, and I wanted something that was oversized, not too long, probably a split hem, which I think I'm going to have to add to that sweater number 30. But because it was a sport weight yarn with the mohair, I didn't want to really fiddle too much with gauge. And so I looked at a lot of patterns from Rosetta and a lot from Morka Knit and you know, a lot of designers and a lot of the sweaters that they had that were that kind of simple sweater. And I didn't want to knit anything from Petite Knits. Everybody knits from Petite Knits, and I don't know, for some reason I'm resistant. Anyway, I looked and I ended up selecting sweater number 30 from My Favourite Things, which I bought and cast on and, you know, was plodding along. And then what happens on the 31st of January? The perfect pattern drops on Ravelry for this yarn. And I don't want to pivot and buy another pattern, but I really wish that I had held off till the next day, because had I have held off till the next day, I would have knitted. Instead of that, I would have knitted the Econ sweater by the Knit Pearl Girl, which was released on the 31st of January, the day after. It's got a contiguous collar, contiguous shoulder, which is a construction that I really wanted to use in 2025, and it's finished with a split hem, 2x2 rib, and it's a DK weight gauge, but I think I could probably easily get a DK weight gauge out of those two yarns. I'm actually using this one on a 3.5mm needle, which is a pretty big needle for me, and I'm getting a gauge of 20, I'm getting a gauge of 20 stitches to 27 rows, and the gauge on this is 18. So the pattern gauge for the jumper that I'm knitting is 18 stitches and 27 rows. I'm getting 20 stitches and 27 rows, but I think after blocking that'll relax. So I think I've got the perfect gauge for the Econ sweater. Watch this space, because I think the more I talk about it, the more I realise that my sweater number 30 is so oversized. And it's still going to be quite warm in the second week of March in Canberra, even though Canberra gets cold in winter. They said to me yesterday at my knitting group, they said, "You won't be wearing that on the 7th of March in Canberra." And maybe they're right. But maybe if I pivot to an Econ sweater, I will. What would you do? What would you do? Tell me, what would you do? It's a better length too. Decisions. Alright, so they are my triumphs. Let us talk about the disasters. They're pretty low stakes disasters, aren't they, when your knitting doesn't go right? Considering how many disasters have been happening lately, I probably shouldn't laugh about this being a disaster. This is my swatch for the Miletus dress, which is a dress that has been designed in Knitting for Olive Pure Silk. I thought that Knitting for Olive Pure Silk with the loose knitting that I do was going to be too much of a challenge for me to knit that yarn evenly and have a success with that project, even though I really do want to make a midi length stocking stitch dress in a fingering weight yarn. So I bought this yarn, which is 100% silk, that is a fingering weight yarn, and I have swatched. And I've swatched on this 275 needle. Yeah. It's too thick. It really does actually have a texture similar to almost a DK weight. Now I don't mind knitting entire jumpers in 4-ply. As a matter of fact, I don't mind knitting entire jumpers on 2mm needles. I've done that before too. And I think, you know, I don't know. They take a long time, but they're worth it. I really love the fine gauge knitting. So I knitted this, and I'm getting a gauge on this of, I don't know, something. But it's just not fine enough. And I am not going to knit my Miletus dress in this yarn, even though I've already bought the yarn to do so. I'm going to make something else with this yarn. And I think I might crochet a tunic from this. But I'm not going to do that this year because I still do want to make the Miletus dress. And I think I'm going to go back to the original pattern and either make it in Knitting for Olive Pure Silk or knitting for olive, cotton, merino. Because I knitted a tank in cotton merino last year, as you know, because I'm sure you're all returning viewers and you've seen that I've knitted the basic boat neck tank in cotton merino, and I wear that all the time. I had it on this morning before I put this back on to come and talk about it online, but I wear it all the time, and even in the heat it's pretty good. It's not too bad, and I think that the structure that the merino is going to give the cotton for that dress might actually be beneficial to the stretch that the finished item is going to have. No, not that one. Where is it? Here. Right, sorry. Okay, so I thought I'd lost my whip, but I haven't. I finished the quilt portion of, it's a bit hard because I'm going around the back now. I finished the quilt portion of the Stella quilt cushion, and I decided to suck it up, and even though it was going to be pretty dull, I'm just going to actually knit the back the way the pattern wants you to do it, and I've started doing that. And it's actually much quicker because you don't have to change yarns, because you actually knit one big mitered square for the back of the cushion, whereas the front of the cushion is several pieces of mitered square going together into a quilt fashion. I think it's not going to take much knitting as long as I can actually put some effort into it instead of getting carried away by all the distracting knits and that beautiful purple. Anyway, but look, I finished the quilt cushion part and I'm going around the edge now, and it's coming out really well. I'm really enjoying that. I'm so happy to get this beautiful yarn out of stash. I was originally going to make a pressed flowers cardigan out of this, but it's I never started it, and sometimes I think that even though I've got these plans, if I don't start them, I think that's a sign to me sometimes that I might not really want them. If I'm always finding time to do something else, maybe I don't really want my pressed flowers cardigan as much as I think I do. This is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to finishing this and showing that to you when that gets done. And last but not least, I can't remember what I was up to last time I showed you my Alpenglow blanket from Pearl Soho linen quilt, but I'm up to here. I'm on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm still on the sixth colour pair out of 20. So I'm still not yet halfway. And once again, just in case you've missed it before, there's the warm side and there's the cool side. It's genius. In New South Wales, we're heading into the agricultural show season, and most agricultural shows in New South Wales have a craft competition component, and in that craft competition component there's usually knitting and crochet, and because they're competitions they get judged. Duh. Well, my really great friend, knitting friend Donna, is actually a knitting judge, and she judges the Royal Easter Show and has judged the Royal Easter Show quite a few times. She's not judging the Royal Easter Show in 2025, but what I thought I'd do is I thought I'd get her on here and we will sit and have a chat about what constitutes an award-winning project in an agricultural show, what judges are looking for, what they'd like to see more of and what they'd like to see less of in the shows. So if you've got any questions that you've always wanted to ask a knitting judge, they say there's no knitting police, but I know one, so I'll be bringing her on next week. And so that's it for today. I'm going to say goodbye to you, but before I leave you, I'm going to do a trick. Are you ready? Here's how you reskein a skein of yarn that's come unwound. Take it in your hand, stretch it out. Go round and around and around with your thumb until it is quite tightly wound. Mark off halfway with your teeth. Go up, let go. And then put your little end through the loop on the other side, straighten it out, and there you have reskeined your yarn. Thank you once again for joining me. I really love hanging out with you guys and talking about knitting, and I appreciate every single one of you. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.